on the day that he was approved by the US Congress, he went on record from his estate in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, making a series of statements which have sent shockwaves through world politics. Amongst those were that Greenland must belong to America, the Panama Canal must belong to America, and even Canada must be a part of America. And when it comes to Greenland and the Panama Canal, he even refused to rule out the use of force, military force, to annex those areas, essentially. Now, this has obviously been a big shift. It seems to, although he said many of these things before, but it seems like this time it's a lot more serious, and it's been taken serious by commentators around the world. What do you think this represents as a shift in U.S. foreign policy?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hope I've got an interesting answer, or at least an opinion. I mean, you can all have opinions about what Donald Trump says. He says many things, and very often what he says seems to be quite, well, not to waste words on it, it seems to be quite absurd, quite nonsensical, and many people have taken it like that. Oh, perhaps maybe he's just joking, or maybe he's just making a point, attacking certain people, insulting certain people in certain nations, which he's a specialist at doing. Yeah, but you see, I think that's, in a way, in my opinion, that's underestimating Donald Trump as a politician. Because if you examine his statements carefully, some of them, of course, are nonsensical, I will grant you that, but not all of them. And this one in particular, it caught my... I was interested in, and many other people also were quite interested and quite shocked by it. And these statements are quite shocking if you take them literally. But what's the meaning behind it? You see, I believe that very often with Trump, because he has an agenda. Oh yes, he's got it, and it's quite coherent. It's not no secret. It's not an incoherent thing. It's quite a coherent agenda if you care to analyze it. And in the words of Shakespeare, though in Hamlet, though this be madness, yet there's method in it. By the way, you forgot to mention Mexico. You also had a few interesting things to say about Mexico. Now, the choice of countries is interesting, by the way. Canada, which is next door to the United States, and Iceland, which is arguably part of the same
Greenland.
Continent. Did I say Iceland? Greenland, I beg your pardon. Which arguably,
lots of ice there, but still Greenland.
It's Greenland, you're quite right. Which is a country with a small population, owned by Denmark, by the way, controlled by Danish imperialism, I'll put it that way.
Oh yeah, there's a colony.
It is a colony, indeed it is. With a lot of interesting natural resources, which of course the American imperialists would be interested in possessing. So there's logic in that. And Mexico also is a next door neighbor, a big country, an important country, south of the border. Now, what's also interesting is what he didn't mention in this speech. I note, for example, I don't think he mentioned Ukraine. And that's not an accident. We'll come back to that later on. Now, this speech has horrified many people and shocked many people, especially the Europeans, who are frankly terrified at the prospect of Donald Trump coming to power. They've done everything in their power to stop him coming to power, by the way, and they've failed. I mean, it's astonishing the lengths to which they've gone to start, this convicted felon, 1,001 court cases, very hostile press and media, and so that's okay. It's all failed. And he was elected, by the way, with a considerable majority, much more than what I personally had anticipated. Now, the question is, why should the Europeans be so worried? They should be worried, by the way. Now, for example, let's just take the question of Greenland. Greenland belongs legally to Denmark. Although there's an independence movement in Greenland, but I think the present president is a member of a separationist or independentist party. I might be wrong. I think that's correct. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He actually rules out he was asked specifically, he ruled out the possibility of using military force to achieve these objectives. Now, you can take that as you wish. But at the very least, however, is it not quite incongruous, to put it mildly, that here's a man that will be in charge of an important imperialist country, America, which is actually implicitly threatening military action against Denmark, which is a member of NATO. Now that's a serious question, because the Europeans are terrified, first of all, by Trump's clear determination to pull out of the Ukraine. We'll come back to the Ukraine later on, but that's lost, and he knows it's lost. And he would like to get America out of that. No, his objective, and furthermore, he's repeatedly expressed his skepticism towards NATO. Is this not, that's what they're afraid of, the Europeans, are the Americans not planning to dump Europe, to put it bluntly, and move on to something else? Now, let's assume that might be true. It might be true, by the way. I wouldn't put it past Trump. Make America great again. America first. That's his policy.
Yes.
And the rest of the world, including Europe, last. Trump couldn't care less about Europe, as a matter of fact. Doesn't particularly like Europe, I think. And he certainly couldn't care about the Ukraine. He wants to get out. He makes no secret about it, and I believe that he will. He says publicly he's opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. Now, that's an interesting point, right? But of course, this says all the alarm bells are ringing in Europe. But let's assume for a moment that this is true, that he's got a plan. Why should he have such a plan? That's the point. And what does his alternative consist of? Now, there's been an interesting change in world politics. The change is taking place all the time. So many people don't notice this, but you see, for a long time, the United States, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a long time after the Second World War, where the world was effectively divided up between two gigantic superpowers. Mighty American imperialism on the one hand, and mighty Stalinist Soviet Union on the other hand. And therefore, relationships were frozen for a long time. Each of these states, powerful states, controlled spheres of influence. There was an unspoken agreement that they wouldn't interfere with each other's spheres of influence. And this uneasy balance of forces, if you like, was backed up by the fact that they both possessed powerful nuclear weapons. And there was a policy known as MAD, which you've heard of, mutually assured destruction. So therefore, they weren't going to go down the road of war and so on. Now, by the way, here's an interesting point. For a long time, take NATO, for example. For a long time, the Americans considered Europe to be fundamental to their interests, Western Europe, as a means of halting the advance of the Soviet Union. Therefore, it was fundamental to their interests. And they actually underwrote, at least theoretically, NATO gave the Europeans a written guarantee that the Americans would support them against Russia, that they'd have the back. The Europeans would be supported by the US, by an unspoken guarantee of security. Now, all of this, that existed for a long time. Then, of course, the fundamental change was the collapse of the Soviet Union in about 1990, thereabouts. And after that, the power of Russia, Soviet Union as it then was annulled virtually.
Yeah.
The Russians could not intervene to defend their interests. And the Americans, they tore up all the agreements, even formal agreements. For example, there was a clear agreement, repeatedly stated that NATO would not advance eastwards from Germany. Even Germany, Western Germany, was not supposed to join NATO, as a matter of fact.
Eastern Germany, yes.
No, Western Germany was not supposed to join. It was not supposed to join NATO. None of them were supposed to join. And they weren't supposed to advance 1 inch. Well, since then, of course, they've advanced repeatedly. And not inch by inch, but 1,000 kilometers by 1,000 kilometers in the direction of the Russian border. And the Russians were powerless at that time to do anything about it, to stop, although they saw it with growing alarm and growing concern, which they repeatedly expressed. The Americans then stepped into things like the Balkans, into Yugoslavia, which they succeeded to break up with disastrous results. Czechoslovakia, the same. All this kind of, and then finally, of course, the Middle East, with the invasion of Iraq. Iraq was a former Soviet sphere of influence. They wouldn't have dared to have touched Iraq previously. They just stepped in, with disastrous consequences. Now, but this process, again, you see, what you see there is a mentality which still exists in the USA. Now, that's the important point. Among a significant layer of the American ruling class, there is an idea that America can do just what it likes. America at that time, because of the Soviet Union was prostrate, China had not yet emerged as a major power. America had colossal power. There was only one superpower in the world, that was the United States. And of course, with colossal power comes colossal arrogance. They really thought that they could dominate the world, and dominate everything. That's, by the way, enshrined in a very interesting doctrine, which still exists, by the way, in their heads at least. I think it's called the rules-based international order. Have you heard of that? Everyone's heard of it, but nobody's able to define it. It's not been written down anywhere. Nobody's voted for it. The UN never voted for it. Nobody's ever, no government, the American government has never voted. But here it is, they repeatedly insist, this is what the order that must exist. The rules-based international, and the question is, what rules? Who makes up the rules? And the answer is, the Americans make up the rules according to their own convenience. So they change them every 5 minutes according to their interests. And therefore, every other country in the world is obliged to obey these rules unquestioningly. Any country that questions these rules is subject to attacks, to economic sanctions, to all kinds of aggression, to all kinds of humiliation, and ultimately to military invasion, as the case of Iraq, of Saddam Hussein, who previously, by the way, was an American puppet, incidentally, in the war against Iran. Anyway, that's a separate question. But you see, this situation lasted, but now it's changed again. With the re-emergence of Russia, Russia has become again a powerful nation, not just militarily, but economically also it's become a powerful nation. China also has emerged. And therefore you have a situation, a map of the world now. It's a bit like geology where the tectonic plates move, Yes. And when the tectonic plates move, you get explosions taking place. And that's also goes for world politics. Now you have a different state of affairs, where there are several great powers, if you like, emerging. Some have emerged, some are in the process of emerging. Some are regional powers like Turkey and Israel and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, there are major powers like China and Russia, which have now successfully challenged the US. I think it's correct to say, according to some measures, the Chinese economy is bigger than the US economy. I don't know, some measures say that, not everything, of course. Russia, of course, is just in the process of winning the war in the Ukraine, despite all the efforts of the Americans. Here you see the limits of American power, and therefore, this is the point which we have to stress. Therefore, there's a change whereby America is no longer able to dictate. It's actually overreached itself, like the Roman Empire overreached itself. There's an interesting comparison could be made, which I won't go into that, but it's an interesting point. But they definitely overreached themselves. And now you see that clearly in the Ukraine. And Trump, that's the point, is drawing the necessary conclusions, which some of the others are reluctant to draw, very reluctant to draw. But by God, sooner or later they'll have to draw it. Life itself will impose it upon them. And surely, to come back to your opening question, and I will finish on this, one possible interpretation, it's only a theory, it's a theory which you can accept or reject, that's up to you. But I think it's very, very, very interesting. If Trump is drawing the correct conclusion, which is this: America is no longer able to maintain the position that they are the sole world power and they can dictate however they please in any part of the world. Those days are over, he's concluded. The Ukrainian business, he's very bitterly critical of Biden. He blames Biden quite correctly for dragging the US into this unnecessary conflict in Ukraine. He wants out. And if it was up to him, I'm sure he'd want the US to get out of NATO also. He doesn't like NATO. Doesn't like the UN if it comes, or anything of that sort, or the World Trade Organization if it comes to that. No. He wants America to go its own. Yes. But America now must concentrate. Now get a load of this. This is the point. If his intention, and it may well be his intention, if his intention that America must, in a sense, retreat from its global role and retrench behind its natural borders of a great power, that would be what? Precisely, it would be the American. It's a bit like the Monroe Doctrine you'd have heard of the 19th century, And in fact, the present situation that is emerging is far more similar to the situation in the 19th century up to 1914 than what it is now. It's much more similar to what it was after 1945. It's very similar. And therefore, it makes sense. Not necessarily that America is going to conquer Canada, for example. Yes, but that somehow that America would increase its domination one way or another over Canada, that's on the cards. And the seizure, the taking over of Greenland, that's on the cards. I see Trump's son is there now. Now, what's he doing? Is he there to watch the Eskimos and the seals? I don't think so. It's supposed to be a private visit. If you can believe that, you can believe anything. And what he said when he was there, how nice it would be if Greenland was part of the United States. How happy everyone would be. Now, that's serious stuff. I think he means it, by the way. I think and the same thing with Mexico. The Roman domination, they already dominate Mexico, but they want to tighten that domination. They would like to establish not direct military control. I don't think that's on the cards. But something like the relationship which existed previously after 1940 of the Soviet Union in relation to Finland, where they didn't have troops based in Finland or didn't openly control the Finnish government. But in practice, Finland was basically subordinate to the interests of Russia. And something like that, to tighten their control over Canada, over these contiguous countries, that would be precisely a solid base for what? For the creation of the strengthening of real American imperialism as one more global power amidst others, because there are others, like Russia and China in particular, possibly others will come to the fore. But for the time being, let's talk about them. And they have powerful interests in other countries, which they're busy strengthening. So we see here the beginning of a restructuring on a global scale, and this will have tremendous consequences for the future. Therefore, what Trump is saying is not necessarily a load of nonsense, as some people imagine. It is, as I say, though this be madness, yet there's method in it.